Stalin may have been on his way out. And of course, anti-Semitism within communism increased during the 1970s, as it was revealed that most of the doctors who were involved in the assassination of Stalin were Jewish, and so there is a feeling in Russia that a Zionist-led America is trying to, for religious reasons and strategic reasons, is trying to encircle Russia through the Central Asia and Israel in the Middle East and in other ways. But the question remains: if the Russians disappear, will they be the first states to develop without the parent nation? Welcome to part 4. As I was saying in the previous video, will Russia be the first parent nation of a civilization to have a state that succeeds it, where they become extinct? And as I said, after with the problems of the mafia and Jewish oligarchs and everything else within Russia, after the fall of communism, there was another problem. Not only the resources being removed, but the mass poverty, the mass inflation, inflation of 114% in some cases. They didn't have although America has 300% debt on its GDP, America's systems to be able to cover that up through double book entry accounting and other systems to absorb the shock, or through its Federal Reserve System and the petrodollar system, it exports its inflation abroad. So until the dollar collapses, that inflation won't come home directly. Russia after the fall of communism, didn't have this. It had a central bank which went rogue, of course, was controlled by various criminal elites. But the other major factor, the thing that killed the most people, was the combination of tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS. Because of course there is vast amounts of malarial mosquitoes within Russia. People were turfed out of their houses by banks and criminal elites, and can you imagine being homeless in 40 degree below weather, or 50 degrees below if you live in Siberia? The people were living in woods. The former Red Army, what we were so afraid of, was living off of pickled vegetables which they kept in their storerooms. Now, the Russians are resourceful people. Most people have cellars storing food and water and other things for the winter. But it was not only a physically weak and starved population, it also had endemic diseases throughout Russia, influenza outbreaks, tuberculosis outbreaks, AIDS epidemics, not only from people not practicing safe sex, but also from the endemic amount of drugs being taken in Russia. So that's why I called it the other white genocide. But in Russia's case, it's being done not only by Jewish oligarchs and Russian mafia people affiliated with Italy. It was done by the Russians themselves, and it was done by also foreign leaders within the Soviet Union, such as the Georgian Stalin, and most of the people within the Russian elite within the Soviet Union were not Russian themselves, as Lenin was the inspirer of, and he was Jewish, so they have a lot to answer for in the case of Russia, and as was shown with a recent comment left on my channel by somebody who worked in the German embassy in Russia. He said he didn't know whether to laugh or cry when Russian neo-Nazis walked past his embassy on Hitler's birthday, giving Hitler salutes. The Russians perhaps are believing as they become fewer and fewer that perhaps they made the wrong decision in the Second World War. it's lucky for the Western world that they did make the wrong decision, if that's what they believe, because if the Third Reich and the Soviet Union had got together and really been true allies, we probably wouldn't be sitting here now. Because of course, what was the first thing when Martin Bormann tried to take over the Third Reich from Adolf Hitler? Was the first place he fled to when that it discovered and the Allies were invading Germany? He went to Russia, where Stalin had him killed. So there are many different strands of history, of course, going on, and of course the Germans themselves know what communism is like in Eastern Germany, since they had half their country conquered by the Soviet Union, and the terrible amount of ethnic cleansing, the 18 million Germans who were turfed out of their home by the Allies and the Soviet Union from Eastern Europe, and of course the estimated between 2 is a conservative estimate of the 2 million German women who were raped and killed by the Soviet army, and of course the 10 million who were estimated to have been raped and by the Soviet army in total. So it's a tragic history for the Russians. You can only hope that that somewhere they can achieve some kind of dignity, modernity, and happiness, and I hope they do. Because although they have been a barbarous nation at times, they are a great people. They do have an intellectual history in folklore, in opera, in classical music, in art, in terms of science. Individuals who have gone against the grain of Russian society and superstition and folklore have achieved great things. They were the first people to put a man into space, although albeit based on German technology. They were the first people to attempt to send a man to the moon, although that failed. They were the first people to put a radio satellite, Sputnik, into orbit, and at times they did even challenge the West technologically and economically. Do they really deserve to be wiped off the face of the earth, basically, by both economics and Jewish and Russian gangsters, basically, as well as their own government, which is locking up, but still locking people up and executing them? It's difficult to say, but unlike the Boer genocide, which is going on, caused by the Zulu nationalist communists in South Africa, which is being ignored by the West, the effect of a collapse of Russia, of the Russian nation, if the Russian state doesn't survive, would be catastrophic, because of course they are the people with the second most nuclear weapons in the world, and if you believe that nuclear weapons in this world are an asset, I can't really agree with you. They are a deterrent to some extent, but it's more likely that criminal groups will try and use nuclear weapons to start wars or cause terrorist attacks, and so I think their elimination would be a great thing for the world. But you just can't eliminate the knowledge, that's the problem. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this series on Russia, and let's hope that the Russians can turn themselves around, come to some form of Scandinavian type social democracy, and maybe even join the EU at some point in time, because they are fast losing control of their Far Eastern and Central Asian provinces. They won't be ethnically Russian anymore. They will be probably Muslim or Han Chinese or Korean, and so Russia's independent movement towards a Eurasian Union as a foreign policy strategy is maybe mean a break with China, and maybe even a movement towards the West. Let's hope for it. Thank you for listening.